Today is Tuesday, 27th of February. It's an occasion that we've arranged for everyone to come together to practice meditation, to chant the Buddhist teachings and to listen to the Dhamma. It's an occasion when we're training our minds in the practice of mindfulness and developing the concentration of samadhi, aiming to experience the peace, the inner peace that comes through the practice, and to let our minds and hearts experience some real rest from the world. In the daytime we work, we have to go out and work and do all the things that we have to do. We have to find, earn a living in the right way, practice right livelihood. But now it's time to work with the mind, to rest, give the mind some real rest from all of that, the burdens, the duties and responsibilities of daily life, and bring the mind to the Dhamma. So we focus on our meditation object as we're practicing sitting meditation together. We focus on the Dhamma as we chant, and all of this helps us to overcome that tendency towards restlessness, agitation of mind, different moods of negativity and irritation, and all the different attachments and desires that we can get caught up into, all the different doubts and confusion we might have. This practice of meditation helps us to experience at least some freedom from them and see them reduce, diminish, maybe even disappear from our minds as we meditate. When our minds are overcome by these different experiences, what we call the 5 hindrances that block the arising of peace and happiness in our mind, we can see when the 5 hindrances are present, there's no spaciousness or clarity in the mind. It's just caught into confusion and stress and suffering. And every day we have to deal with that. So the Lord Buddha gave us teachings for a way out of this kind of stress and suffering that we experience. Teachings that lead out of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death and suffering. Whatever country we are living in, and however much material happiness and wealth we experience, that alone still won't free us from this. It won't free us from suffering. We'll still have these different experiences of stress and suffering. And if we never turn to the practice, spiritual practice, to develop our minds, then we won't free ourselves from these experiences of stress and suffering. But the Buddhist teachings give us a path. It's what we call the Noble Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, which, as we know, is summarized as the practice of morality, concentration and development of wisdom and insight. And one who follows this path, wherever they live, whatever country or place, whether they're ordained as a monk or nun or just living as a lay person, that person, if they follow the path, they'll prosper and they'll come closer and closer to the end of suffering. So as a disciple, a student of the Buddha, we must exert our minds and put effort forth to overcome these hindrances, these different obstacles to the arising of goodness and happiness that tend to drag the mind down to more unwholesome states where we suffer and get caught into stress. We have to really work at developing this path, following it, bringing it up in our minds to develop our wisdom and understanding of truth. Even though we do have to work, we have duties with our families and so on, and these are important, it's also necessary to see that the training of the heart to experience inner peace, inner happiness is even more important, because this is what frees us from the mental defilements, the kilesas, which are the cause of all our suffering and unhappiness. So we have to see this, observe and contemplate this, to see that this practice, chanting, meditation, listening to the Dhamma, contemplating the Dhamma, is all very necessary for us if we are to train our minds. If we're to deal with the restlessness and agitation that we normally experience, if we're to develop states of concentration and awareness and the peace that comes from that, we really have to work with the mind to overcome these obstacles, these hindrances, and this will allow us to experience the happiness and the peace of a calm, concentrated mind. We focus on our meditation object. That might be the breath, the in and out breath, or the word Buddho, and until the mind becomes one-pointed and focused and still. And when there is this stillness and calm, this gives us a chance to see the truth about reality, about our lives, to see and understand the truth that all of us are subject to old age, sickness and death. This is part of nature. When we have that peace and clarity of mind, we can see that this body that we inhabit really is not ours. It doesn't belong to us. As long as we keep attaching to it, then we're going to keep on suffering. Even if we find this practice difficult to do, we find it troublesome and difficult, we still should find the time to put in the effort to practice. Whether we're in the monastery or we're at home, we must find the time to commit ourselves to the training, to the practice, so that we can raise the level of our minds, to keep moving towards this inner happiness, inner peace that comes through the practice. A peace that we, when we do experience it, we'll know this is something we've never experienced before. It's something much better, more satisfying than we've ever practiced, experienced before. These 5 hindrances are the real obstacles to the attainment of any states of goodness and true happiness in our minds. So what do we have to do about them? We have to learn how to contemplate the truth of this life, of this existence. Where do we come from as human beings? We begin in the wombs of our mothers, and it's just literally a little drop of liquid. And over time, days and days passing, we receive more and more of the 4 elements, air, earth, fire and water, coming together, growing together, developing together to form from that one little drop into a human being, the form of a human being in our mother's wombs. And straight away from the beginning, our consciousness attaches to this form, and we start to see it as a self, our self. And you can see how over time that attachment to this body, these 4 elements that have come together to form this body, leads on to all kinds of problems, confusion, suffering in the world, in society, in our own minds, because of this attachment. But once we have faith in the Buddhist teachings and we're fortunate to meet them, then we have a way to deal with that problem, that suffering that we encounter. And the teachings encourage us to practice. We have to try to overcome all these different unwholesome tendencies that are fed by delusion and misunderstanding, and cause obstructions to goodness and happiness arising in our minds. We have to contemplate them, see them clearly, let go of them. If we do follow the mental defilements that come from delusion, it always leads to suffering. If we follow greed, it leads to suffering. If we follow anger, it leads to suffering. If we follow delusion, it leads to suffering. Wherever we follow these mental defilements, they'll pull us towards suffering, and they'll pull the level of our mind down. And they don't just end there, they don't just arise and pass away. The more we give into them, follow them, these different unwholesome tendencies of mind that are fed by delusion, the more they'll grow, they'll become established in our mind, they'll keep feeding off our lack of wisdom, lack of understanding, and they'll become stronger and cause us more suffering. The only thing that these mental defilements are really afraid of is the path of practice that the Buddha gave us, Sila, Samadhi and Panya. This is the path that directly leads to the abandoning of mental defilements, greed, anger, and delusion. Even if we find this practice difficult, especially in the beginning, it can often be quite difficult and troublesome to practice. It can even seem like it's increasing our sense of suffering. But we must have patience, and we must see that if we keep practicing, then little by little we'll experience more happiness inside as a result. So it's very important to be patient with the practice. In the beginning, we have to have restraint, because we have these attachments, these mental defilements already rooted into our minds. We have to begin our practice with this foundation of sila, morality. Morality means a practice of restraint and carefulness with our speech and our actions. We have the 5 precepts which are teaching us to be very careful, very mindful what we say, what we do. The 8 precepts which increase that sense of carefulness and restraint, and the 227 precepts of our monk only increases that sense of care and restraint. They stop the kilesas, the unwholesome mental defilements, from spilling out and displaying themselves in our speech and actions when we follow precepts. So they stop us from creating the most coarse kinds of suffering. Once we have developed and established this restraint in our hearts, and we're being very careful how we act, how we speak, it helps us to stop creating suffering in our daily lives, and immediately we'll experience some happiness as a result of that. And that happiness is experienced as a radiance of mind, a sense of spaciousness, freedom from remorse, freedom from these unwholesome tendencies. But we must be careful, especially as, even though we might have established ourselves in sila, there's still some dangers on the path. Especially nowadays, there are many techniques, many teachers around, and it's very easy to become confused and unclear about exactly what we should be doing in the path, how to build on our sila and develop meditation. So we must be careful not to just follow our doubts and our uncertainty and let this pull us around. And we must also be careful not to be too impatient to see results from the practice. When we've heard about the attainments and the result of the practice, this can make us very impatient. But we have to see that the practice is like planting a tree. If we just plant a tree and just want to keep looking at it, wondering when's it going to grow up, when's it going to be big, then of course we'll be very unpeaceful, not very happy. We have to realize that these things take time and they have to grow and develop in their own way. So keep practicing, keep putting in the wholesome effort, and don't be disheartened or give up the practice if sometimes you're not peaceful. You're practicing, you find, oh, you're not peaceful, the mind isn't very concentrated or mindful. Don't let that lead to disheartenment, and don't concentrate on that too much, otherwise it will lead you to a sense of, oh, why do I practice? I might as well just give up, I'm not getting anywhere. Luang Por Chah always emphasised that the main thing is just not to stop, not to give up. Keep going, keep practicing, keep developing mindfulness in every posture, at every moment. This will help you to restrain these unwholesome kilesas, these unwholesome tendencies of mind that cause us the suffering. The practice of mindfulness is very much like building a dam. Once you build a dam, then you can prevent your water from flowing all over the place, and you can channel it to do good. So we have to practice mindfulness, and particularly the best way to develop mindfulness is through the practice of meditation. Find some time every day to practice meditation. You might practice anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, and practice at least once a day, even twice if you can. You'll find in these times when you're committing yourself, sincerely practicing meditation, then your mindfulness will improve little by little, and that will send results out through the rest of your day. You'll become more aware of what you're saying, what you're doing through your day, and you'll be able to observe your mind better from moment to moment in your family life, your work life. You'll be able to ask yourself, are these thoughts I'm thinking, are they wholesome? Are they unwholesome? You'll be able to reflect like this and really see how the unwholesome thoughts cause you suffering. And more importantly, you'll be able to see that all the different thoughts, moods, mental states we experience are anicca, dukkha, anatta. They're impermanent, unsatisfactory, and ultimately not our true self. If we keep watching like this, keep observing and reflecting with mindfulness, we'll see this truth more and more clearly in the mind. And this will lead to a sense of peace and detachment from those mind states which normally cause us suffering. This peace comes because we know our own minds. We're sure of the truths that the Buddha taught us, and we'll become more experienced. And from that experience, our minds will gradually the level of them will be raised as a result of the practice. We'll be rising above the normal kinds of stressful thinking that we can experience. Little by little, the factors of samadhi that we've heard about will start to arise. There'll be vitakka, initial application to our meditation object; vichara, sustained application on the object; piti, some joy and interest in the object; sukha, there'll be happiness, contentedness; and ekaggata, one-pointedness. Gradually, little by little, these different factors of samadhi will arise in the mind and come together to give us increasing sense of inner peace, contentment and happiness from the practice of meditation. And these states of happiness, contentment will become deeper, last longer, and become more profound and more refined as we continue the practice. This is the happiness that comes from samadhi, concentration. It's even deeper, more profound than the happiness of sila, morality. And both of these together, the happiness of sila, happiness of samadhi, help us to overcome these 5 hindrances that obstruct the mind and cause confusion in the mind. But again, we have to be alert here, have to be careful. The happiness that comes from meditation, we can still attach to this. We can feel we've attained something and form a self around that happiness, attached to it as a self. And then again, this can become a delusion. So the Buddha always encouraged us to keep contemplating here. Don't just rest easy and attach to this happiness of samadhi, but use it as a basis to continue your contemplation and observing of truth. And you can see that if you turn back to contemplate this body when you're peaceful, you can see this body is subject to old age, sickness and death. You have to really ask yourselves this question: do you want this? Do you want old age, sickness and death? Do you want more old age, sickness and death? As long as we have delusion and misunderstanding, we'll keep attaching to this world. As long as we don't contemplate these truths, we'll just keep attaching to the world, keep getting caught into becoming different moods and mental states, and these feed ultimately more and more birth. So we'll still be stuck into the round of birth and death as long as we never contemplate these things. Whatever we attach to in this world is something that must change. It's unsatisfactory because of that. If something's always changing its form, it can never last with us, then it's unsatisfactory, isn't it? It can't bring us lasting satisfaction, lasting happiness. And you have to say that which changes, can you say it's you or yours? Can you really own something that is changing and disappearing from you? No, we can't. We can't hold on to anything. We can't hold on to any of it. So the more peace and happiness we develop from our meditation, the more this supports the contemplation of truth, and the more we'll see these things that the Buddha has been talking about. We'll see that this body and mind are all anicca, dukkha and anatta, and we'll gradually be able to uproot these different mental defilements of greed, anger and delusion that come out of the delusions, and move towards a place of truth where we can experience happiness. So in conclusion, practicing the Dhamma, we have to rely particularly on patience and endurance, because we're always having to go against the grain, go against the tendencies, the habits of mind that have been brought up and conditioned by the kilesa, the mental defilements. The more we can go against the grain of the mental defilements, the more this will pull us to the flow of the dhamma, where when the mind comes across to the flow of dhamma, then it will see the truth of things. It will see the anicca, the dukkha, the anatta of all these different conditioned things, the material world, the mental world. And we'll be able to see how, when we do get lost in things and attached to the world, attached to this body, attached to our different thoughts and mental proliferation, this just creates for us more dukkha, more suffering. But when we practice, we can see how little by little we're starting to detach from this and change that tendency. Then we'll know the value of the practice, we'll understand, and this will give us more patience, more endurance to carry on, to not just to give in to every mood or impulse that is coming from the kilesas. We'll see the value to keep applying sati, mindfulness, to the mind every day, every moment. We'll see that if we keep applying mindfulness, then those states of confusion, uncertainty will start to disappear. If we keep applying mindfulness to the body, then we'll become more and more mindful of every posture and get to know this body. If we keep applying mindfulness, we'll be cutting off all the mental proliferation about the past, the anxiety, the worry, the guilt about the past. We'll be cutting off the mental proliferation about the future, or the worrying and the planning about the future, and learn how to skillfully keep our mind in the present moment and let go of all the different mental states that bother us. And by doing this, we gradually will learn how to overcome the 5 hindrances. Just like somebody who's standing next to a swamp. If the swamp is a very muddy swamp, you won't be able to see the bottom of the swamp or the plants and the animals that are contained in that swamp, in the water. But for one who practices mindfulness and practices the path, it's like they're clearing up the murky waters of that swamp, and the mind, when the mind becomes still and clear through the practice of mindfulness, the confusion, the doubts and worries all disappear, and then you can see everything in it, just like everything that in the swamp starts to become exposed. It's at this point, when the mind becomes clear, that we can really see the truths of things. We can see the inner nature of this body, not just the external form that we normally attach to a human body, but we see inside what it's truly like, and we see its nature, that it's something that is anicca, dukkha, anatta. We see the mind and the mental states we experience as anicca, dukkha, anatta. And by seeing this little by little, we're seeing nibbana. This is the beginning of realizing the end of suffering and the end of attachment. And we can see how, by letting go of our attachments, by practicing mindfulness, that this will be the way that leads to the ultimate realization of nibbana, complete end of suffering and true happiness. We'll see more and more the value of the path. We'll know it's really worth following, something that will really take us to happiness. And if we keep practicing according to the true path that the Buddha gave, we can see that our understanding will grow, and that our mindfulness, our wisdom and insight will grow, and eventually we'll be able to let go of all our mental defilements, and so we'll gain more confidence like this. So keep practicing these basic, simple practices that Rinpoche gave us, practicing moderation into things you eat and use, practicing developing mindfulness at all times, and really dedicate yourself to bringing up effort in the practice, because this is the practice that can help us to find true peace, true happiness. It will help us to get beyond all of our doubts and uncertainties and bring us to the ultimate peace and happiness. Andamayang avadakatha sadhu karang dadamase. Sadhu, 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 anumodana. Did you understand what he was saying? Does it make sense to you? He says today he was testing Ajahn Ka's translation skills, talking for a long time and making me have to write and keep up with him. Does anybody have any questions or anything, any doubts? The question was, can females reach enlightenment just the same as males? know in the time of the Buddha that there were bhikkhunis who became enlightened, but since then have there been any ladies who become enlightened? And Ajahn answered that yes, of course, enlightenment is a state that is beyond being male or female. That's the whole point of it. It's a liberating state that takes you beyond the conventional reality of the world. And the qualities of the path that one has to develop, anyone can develop them, man or woman. Even in the time of the Buddha, even a 7-year-old child who's got a fully developed body and brain, intelligent, they can be, because of their accumulated paramita, can actually realise the Dhamma, realise Nibbana at the age of 7. We have to see that as we develop Sila, Samadhi and Panya, you're taking your mind to a place of clarity where you see the true nature, the true essence of all things. And that state where there's full samadhi and wisdom and insight, and then you've gone beyond the state of being a man, being a woman. It's just pure wisdom, pure understanding. The kilesas themselves are also beyond man and woman. Any man, any woman can have kilesas, can have anger, can have greed. So we have to see how the practice takes us deeper beyond the normal conventional reality that we attach to. And the practice takes us beyond being a lay person or a monk or a nun. In the end, when the mind is peaceful, that's dropped as well. So we have to remember these things, these forms on the outside, although they're important. We actually, in the practice, we go well beyond them. And yes, of course, if a lady practices and in the proper way, the correct path, and develops samadhi, develops insight, she can let go of her attachments just the same as anyone else. We have to remember with enlightenment, it's generally a gradual process of practice, and it depends on our karma and our karmic accumulations. If we still have various duties we have to perform in the world, we have to help our family, we have to work, then it's going to take a bit of time and effort. Whether we're man or woman, we have to accept that the more we practice, the quicker and the further we'll go in the practice, but we have to accept where we are in our karmic situation and our personal spiritual development. We have to accept that. The question was that Buddhist teachings seem very wide, covering many areas, many issues. Can they be summarized for us to easily remember them by sort of simple summary? So Ajahn quoted the famous Owadapati Mokkha teaching that we remember at this time on Magha Puja on Saturday, the full moon day. The first verse of that being Sabapapasa Akaranam, abandoning the unwholesome, which, if you want to summarize in practice, what does that mean? It means particularly the practice of restraint in sila, establishing the mind in sila, where one is abandoning on the level of one's actions, one's speech, one's external behavior, all unwholesome tendencies of speech and action, fueled by greed, anger, delusion, so that we can work more deeply inside on the mind itself, the very intentions that might lead to unwholesome actions or speech. The second part of the verse is Kusala Supasampata, which means bringing wholesome dhammas to perfection, completion. So that covers pretty much the whole of our path, from beginning with the practice of dana, developing a sense of generosity, kindness in our daily lives, helping others, thinking of others, being sensitive to others, developing all the different kinds of good, skillful behavior in our daily lives, right up to more subtle inward practices of dana, say developing abhaya dana, giving forgiveness to others, say when we meet with difficult people or in difficult circumstances, having a sense of forgiveness for others, giving up our anger that we might have in these difficult situations, and then developing on with meditation, with chanting, with studying, listening to the teachings. These are all very wholesome practices that will gradually come together, gather together to bring the mind to unity towards the point where it can see the Dhamma. So the highest kind of kusala or wholesome dhammas that can arise, what we call maha kusala, is when states of samadhi, when the mind is firmly one-pointed, is maha kusala, meaning it brings very great results to the practitioner. Maha panya is maha kusala, meaning when we have deep insight into the true nature of reality, it brings a profound change to the mind of the practitioner. So it's like the perfection of wholesome dhammas. And then the last verse is Saccita Paryottapanam, meaning one brings one's mind to purity and inner radiance when, because of the perfection of wholesome dhammas, one's developed the path of morality, samadhi and panya, wisdom and insight. The effect of that on the mind is to purify the mind. It gradually uproots and removes the mental defilements to the point where the mind is radiant. When there's defilements, unwholesome dhammas in the mind tends to be covered over with a sense of darkness. But when you uproot the defilements, it's like pulling out the darkness, and the mind is left as radiant, pure state, which is what that phrase refers to. So this is like a summary of Buddhist practice. If you ever want to think of what you should be doing, you should be abandoning unwholesome dhammas, developing wholesome dhammas, and purifying your mind.
Ajahn, how does one use one's jhana samadhi to uproot the kilesa rather than suppress it?
In the development of the mind as it follows the path, then yes, we develop first the samadhi that just suppresses the defilements and the unwholesome tendencies of mind, allowing the mind to rest and experience peace, a peaceful, concentrated state. But those defilements are still deep down, they're still rooted into the mind. And this is what we call lokiya samadhi, meaning it's still of a worldly nature, in that it's still subject to anicca dukkha anatta, it still can degenerate. So if the conditions are right, particularly if different forms of greed, anger, delusion come up in the mind enough, then that samadhi can degenerate, disappear, and it can be gone. And that's why we call it worldly, on the worldly or mundane level, because it's still uncertain and it can be shaken. But it's necessary, first of all, in our practice we have to develop our concentration like that, and that's why we experience moments, times when there's concentration and then it seems to disappear again, because it's still of a worldly nature. But as we practice and we develop this concentration, this worldly level of concentration, then we use it as a foundation for the development of insight. The more calm and concentrated states we experience, we use that to support our investigation and contemplation of truth, to see anicca dukkha anatta in all of the material world, the mental world, to see all that very clearly. And as we do that, the more we experience states of samadhi and then turn to investigate the Dhamma to develop deep insight, little by little that is bringing the mind to a state of calm and concentration that is unshakable, and what we call lokuttara samadhi. It's unshakable and won't degenerate and won't be overcome by any form of defilement, greed, anger or delusion, because there's both samadhi and wisdom together in the mind, to the point where it actually purifies one's whole view, a way of looking at things, and the mind won't attach to or get lost in kilesas anymore, because it's seen through them, seen their nature as anicca dukkha anatta, so it detaches from them. And this is the difference. But that's something that's obviously an attainment. It's a result of the practice, and we work up to that point in a gradual way. And so you do use the more worldly, mundane type of samadhi. You have to use that until the point where one's panya, one's wisdom and insight is established in the mind, and then one's samadhi will be changed to lokuttara.
Ajahn, I have another question there. Daily I practice contemplation of the mind state, the kilesa, rather than the contemplation of the body. Is it alright?
Yes, it's alright to practice like this. This is what we call cittanupassana, where we're focusing on the mind and the state of mind and the different mental states arising in the mind through our day. It's quite alright to develop mindfulness in this way, get to know the mind and observe whether the mind is in a wholesome, skillful state or in an unwholesome state. And obviously the skillful states we try to maintain and develop, the unwholesome ones we let go of them. But because this is a valid practice of mindfulness and it's part of the four foundations of mindfulness, you find later on as it becomes more established and one progresses in this practice of watching the mind like this, then one can turn to focus on feelings or focus on the body, and the four foundations of mindfulness will merge together. One's mindfulness will be aware of all those different aspects of our experience. So it's a valid way to practice. We keep doing it, and the more skilled we'll get, then the more we'll understand the path.
I have another question that which I always wanted to ask, but I hesitate to do so. It's about meditating in the China ground and be in the forest. Do we have to do it at all?
It's important to understand with these sort of practices that they're practicing on what you might call an intense level or in a very committed way. So generally it's the practice that would be done by ordained people who would go off, people who've already given up a lot and are practicing meditation every day in quite already a very committed way. They might go off into those situations, go and stay, put up their umbrella and camp alone in a cremation ground. And of course the reason we call it intense practice is because in a situation like that it tends to bring up a lot of intense emotions, and the most obvious one is fear, and one has to really deal with it in a very direct way. Say if one's alone at night in a cremation ground, one has a lot of fear come up. It's hard work, and if one isn't already established in the practice and one doesn't have good mindfulness and hasn't been trained well with a good teacher, then it's even possible one could go a bit off at that point. There's the intensity of the situation, there's the extreme emotion, say the fear that might be coming up, could really put one off. One could become, as I said, vipallasa, one could lose one's marbles or just lose one's sense of reality and become mentally unstable. So it's not something one should do lightly. One would have to go and be prepared for it. The way monks practice when they're in that situation is to they probably, if they're finding they have a lot of mental proliferation, a lot of fear coming up, just endless thoughts of fear and worry and anxiety, then they tend to use a meditation object like Buddho, and they just recite Buddho over and over again and take that as their refuge. And they see with Buddho the fear subsides, the mind becomes calm. When they lose Buddho, then the mind goes crazy and starts thinking all kinds of things. So the first thing they can see is that they have to battle with their own minds, but then at that same time they can also see how the fear is something that we just generate through our own unskillful thinking, through our own deeply rooted attachments and misunderstandings of truth. And when one starts to battle like that, if one does succeed in calming the mind, focusing on Buddho and letting go of that proliferation, then of course one learns a lot from that experience, and one can see how ultimately the things that we're afraid of, the thought of ghosts, death, the unknown, the dark, all this, the real problem is our own mind. It's what it's thinking and creating out of that situation. And if you've managed to establish mindfulness and overcome that, then you learn a lot, you get a lot of insight, a lot of confidence in your practice, and that's why they do it. But one has to see that's quite a difficult, intense practice, and only someone who's prepared and ready for it should do it. So you don't have to really worry or concern yourself too much about that kind of practice. Just carry on doing what you've described to him just now. Keep practicing being mindful of your mind states in your daily life, whether they're unwholesome, wholesome. Just keep doing that and developing a consistency of mindfulness, and already that's something very good. And just keep doing that over and over again for the moment. The question was, Kunuk would like a teaching for her mother. She's going back to Thailand next month. So Ajahn teaching was to remember as we get older, especially if we're into our 70s, that now is the time to really turn our attention to the practice of the dhamma. We have to remember when we come into the world as a baby, we come alone. And when we leave the world, when we die alone, we leave alone. So that although an older person has brought up family and children in their lives and done many good things for other people, accomplished a lot, done a lot, they have to remember at the end these simple truths. You can't take everyone with you. So now is the time to set aside all those duties. The children are old enough to look after themselves, take care of their business. So it's time to set aside the worries, the concerns that maybe had in former years. Now it's quite appropriate to set them aside, not to worry about the family so much, but to concern ourselves more with our own practice. Developing our mindfulness. We have faith in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha already. We should be practicing mindfulness, chanting, dharana, keeping the precepts, meditating, listening to the Dhamma. These are the things we should be spending our time doing now to prepare ourselves, to raise the level of our mind up, bring our mind up to a level of very wholesome state where we're experiencing a lot of inner happiness and joy. We can of course reflect back and recollect some of the good we've done in our lives, bringing up the families, doing different good things, helping support monasteries, charity work and so on in our lives. When we recollect this will help to bring our mind to a state of happiness and a sense of being at ease with ourselves. And we have to learn how to keep doing this, because of course there's a danger if we don't practice, we just let our minds wander, then they will become worried about the kids, worried about the future, what's going to happen, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. And that worry, the anxiety will of course bring the mind's level down to a more stressful state, unwholesome, negative state. And you wouldn't want to die with that kind of suffering. Nobody would want that. So it's important to see now at the end of our lives it is a bit uncertain, we don't know how long we'll be here, so really put effort into the practice. Try and practice regularly, practice meditation, chanting regularly, do dharana regularly, and set aside all other duties. Let the children and the rest of the family deal with the other duties. You don't have to worry about anything now other than the practice and keeping your mind in a fresh and happy state. And to remember that is actually something very beneficial for everyone else. If we're worried about the family, what can we do for them now? We don't have much strength, don't have much ability. What you can do is practice the Dhamma, and that's giving something to the family by being a good example. An older person who's practicing the Dhamma can be a blessing to a family. They can be a blessing in what they say, what they do. So when the family members come to you, you don't just complain and talk about the bad things. Try and talk about the Dhamma. Talk about things that will raise up the level of the younger ones. So you have to think about your speech and try and make your speech a blessing and make it auspicious. Encourage people to do good and practice the Dhamma. And so that our lives can still be a blessing, right? At the end of our life we can actually be more of a blessing maybe than ever before. So we not only help ourselves by practicing the Dhamma, we can help all our other family members as well. And just to remember that, keep remembering that the important thing is to keep the mind peaceful and happy, recollect the Dhamma right through